So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for choosing to come in here today. My name's Andy Brown. I work for a company called Explio, and I'm going to be talking about software quality in human factors. But before that, I'd like to make a few predictions about the future of our software industry. Now, it's always very dangerous making predictions about any industry, but particularly something that's as fast-moving as our own industry here. Okay, but nevertheless, I'm feeling supremely confident about this. So I'm feeling so confident that I'm actually going to be making predictions about our industry in 10 years' time. So if there's any budding entrepreneurs amongst you, do take note of the predictions, because perhaps in 10 years' time you could be a billionaire as a result of them there. Okay, so what are my predictions? So here's the first of my predictions. In 10 years' time, 20% of all the software projects, the big enterprise ERP systems that we start, they will fail before they even finish. They'll be canned. Many of the others, they're going to deliver late, and they're going to deliver over budget. Some of those projects are going to take completely crazy risks in 10 years' time. We're going to work in specialisms, but all of our specialisms are not going to talk and cooperate with each other, so we're all going to work in silos. When we do deliver some software to our customers, we're going to deliver it with far more technical depth than they really want us to be delivering it with. We're going to add in additional, more and more processes there to improve quality. But what we're going to find is that the software quality doesn't actually improve after we've added the processes in. And we're going to build up big regression packs of automated tests. But many of those tests are going to be low value, even though there's higher value tests which are available, which we don't put into the regression packs. Now, some of you may be thinking, how can I possibly predict 10 years in the future? And of course, I'm not predicting at all. All I'm saying is that actually, in 10 years in the future, we're going to be making exactly the same mistakes that we're making today. But how can I be so confident about that? And that's because if you go 10 years back, we were making all these mistakes then. And 10 years before that, we were making all these mistakes in the millennium. And you could go right the way back 50 or more years, and you could actually find in the 70s, we were making all these mistakes. Now, that's not quite true, actually, because in the 70s, we weren't really doing very much testing, so we didn't have those problems there. But we had a whole bunch of other problems as a result of not doing much testing. Now, the question that I've got myself is, why is it that we have got these problems 50 years after we've first been seeing them? Is it because we've never tried to solve them? And the answer there is no, that's certainly not true. There's been lots of people attempted to solve them, claim to solve them. You go into any large bookstore, you go to the IT section, you'll see many books on all of those subjects there. So it's not that we haven't tried to solve them. So what could be the reason? And I think that actually it's that we've missed something here. And I think, in fact, that we've missed two important things. And the first thing is that every software problem has two parts to it. It has a human part and there's a technical part. Now, the people that we are attracted to or attracted to our industry, they love technical problems. That's why we come into this industry. We love those things. So give us a problem that's got a technical part and a human part, and we swarm all over the technical part of it there. We love that bit. We solve that bit there, and then we move on to the next technical part of, or the next technical problem there, leaving behind the human parts there. And so what we see after 50 or so years is that we're solving all the technical parts, but we're leaving behind these human factors. And I think that this is one big part of the problem there. Now, a second part of the problem is that actually is the most important software tool that we use. Okay? We have a very important software tool that we use. However, unfortunately, we don't fully understand it. And actually, it was originally developed for a different use there. So the question you're going to have is, what is this most important software tool, and can you buy shares in it? And actually, the answer is you've already got shares in it, because it's your own mind. Your own mind is far more useful and far more powerful than any of the software tools that we have developed so far or are likely to develop in the near future. However, there's a difficulty with our mind when it comes to solving software problems. And that's firstly that it was developed to solve an entirely different set of problems. We weren't developed, or our mind didn't develop to solve software problems. And the second thing was that our mind developed in an environment that was very different from the current environment that we're sitting in now. And so it's those things that we were facing here. Now, the question is, of course, what problems was our mind set up to solve? Now, it was set up to solve lots and lots of problems, but there's a big overriding problem that it's set up to solve here. And it's as follows. If you're in the current generation, your overriding goal is to get as many copies of your genes into that next generation. And to get those copies of the genes into the best place that they can get their copies of their genes into that next generation. Now, all of the thought processes that you have there, that we've developed, if they do not support this, this goal here, then no matter how successful they are at whatever they are doing, they would be selected out by evolution there. So everything is driving this here. Now, with that there, then you can start to break that down a bit further. So, for example, you can typically break it down into survival, or more specifically, you need to survive for long enough to reproduce, and reproduction itself. And then within there, then there's a whole series of problems that you can break it down further. So within survival, you need to be able to get enough food to eat. So that means you're going to be solving problems around hunting and foraging. So we're going to be fairly successful at that. So then that means you're going to be solving problems around, if you've been searching in an area for a certain length of time, you haven't found any food, how long do you continue searching for food before you abandon that search and search somewhere else? Or a second thing is, how much risk do you take? This is an important thing here. And actually, the answer here is fairly simple, and it's as follows. If there is ample food available, it makes no sense whatsoever to take additional risk to try and get more food or more resources. Okay? However, if there is an inadequate amount of food, and so you are starving to death slowly or quickly, it makes sense to take risks, even if those risks may end up in your death, because they will give you a chance of survival. And we'll see this risk switching later on in overdue projects there. So, we have to find enough food to survive. We also have to avoid being killed and eaten by predators. We also need to avoid succumbing to disease. We need to avoid being killed by enemies or rivals. And we need to avoid being killed or injured in terrible accidents. What's more, we also need to balance all of these things. So, for example, there's no point in attempting to avoid predators by never leaving the cave, for example, because then we'd simply starve to death. So everything has to be balanced here. So we can see that over our evolutionary past, we've built up a whole series of different mechanisms here that are very effective at allowing us to survive. But this is very different. In our modern-day software development world, we've got a very different set of problems that we need to solve. And of course, the question is, where do the thought processes come from that allow us to solve these problems on the right-hand side? Of course, all of these thought processes are coming from the left-hand side. And this is part of where a lot of our problems are coming from. This is why our projects are getting canned, going overdue, and so on like that. So we'll look at a little bit now at that in a little bit more detail. So, for example, 20% of the projects are getting canned or failing, the rest, many of the others being late or overdue. The biggest single cause of this is poor estimation. Yeah. Most of us have been on projects that have been poorly estimated. Yeah. Now, if you plotted out, if you took every estimate that you'd ever seen or made yourself, and you plotted out the actual estimate against the actual value of when the project really delivered, now, if all of the errors that were made on those projects were entirely random due to chance, this is the shape of the graph you would expect to see. Yeah? You'd expect it to see a normal distribution around the mean there of the actual. That's what you'd expect to see. This is not what we see at all. We see something very, very different. So look at this very carefully, because it's telling you something extremely important. It's telling you that the errors in the project estimation, the dominant processes there, those errors, cannot be random noise. What they are is actually, it's a systematic underestimation. Yeah? So, of course, as soon as you mention systematic bias and humans, the cognitive scientists, they get all excited, jump up and down, start waving their arms, and then start yelling out cognitive biases. And of course, this is exactly what is happening here. Our estimations are underestimated because they're being dominated by some cognitive biases here, which are biasing us towards low estimation. And so we'll look at some of these biases that are present. So we'll look at these three here. So anchoring effect, overconfidence, and optimism bias. But there's some others that are involved as well. We'll look at these as well. Now, an important thing to remember about biases is there's a good reason that we must have these biases. If we didn't have them, then they would have been selected out through natural selection. So they must exist for reasons. So if we look at anchoring effect. So this is the first one here. So it's where we get anchored to a first or an early value. Now, this explains why we would become biased if we get anchored to an early value and we don't adjust far enough away. But it doesn't explain why we're biased to a low value. In order to understand that, you need to understand where is the anchor coming from. And so if you think it through enough, you'd actually realize the anchor is coming from the business. Because whenever you're asked to do an estimation, who is it that asks you to do the estimation? It's the business. And the business also, they're probably going to give you a bit of a hint about how much they would like to spend or when they'd like to get there. So typically the business will say, before the estimation, can you get this ERP system in by Christmas for $2 million? Now, you know that's completely ridiculous because you know somebody else who had an ERP system in, it took them 2 years and it cost $5 million. So you know it's an idiotic sort of suggestion. But nevertheless, that has now anchored you. So that you're anchored to that low value, you will adjust upwards, but you won't adjust far enough away. Okay, the next effect there was overconfidence. So overconfidence is where overly confident in our own abilities or our ability to persuade others. So it's like we need to get the database engineers to make some changes for us, and we need them to do it in a certain time period. And we're convinced that we'll be able to persuade them, even though they always do their own stuff, deliver it when it's suitable to them, and they hate our guts anyway. So overconfidence is causing us to underestimate there, even though we've got loads of evidence that actually these things won't work out as we see. Now, an important question that we've got is, why are we overconfident? You know, what evolutionary benefit could it have given us? Because you can see certain disadvantages if you were going up against a predator. Being overly confident could be disadvantageous to you. So the answer here comes from, in our evolutionary past, very often we were involved in what's called competitions, or let's give it the real name, fights. We would fight amongst each other over access to resources, whether it was a land, territory, or access to mating resources there. Okay? Now, if you've watched any nature film, this is one of the favourite bits that the cameraman loves to get there. They love to film there, these two animals from the same species, usually male, fighting over a territory or a mate. But there's a problem with fighting. Fighting is dangerous. So you could get injured or you could get killed. So most species have worked out mechanisms to reduce the danger, yet still sort out who's the boss and who's number two there. And typically what happens is on these nature films, when you see them there, what you'll see is that before the two animals start fighting, you'll see them pacing up and down there, kind of showing off their prowess, their fighting ability there, and their strength. Each of them attempting to intimidate the other one to backing down. Now, you don't need to know much about game theory to work out if you're going to lose a fight, you are better off forfeiting that fight rather than going into a fight that you are going to potentially lose and become injured or killed in. However, if you don't want to forfeit a fight that you would have won. So you can see that these displays of the strength and fighting prowess, they are not honest displays. There's a lot of bluffing and there's a lot of deception going on here. And so you can understand this is where this overconfidence affects you here. And it's a benefit to you. If you continue to be confident that you are going to win this fight, when your rival loses that ability, you will win, even if they were stronger and a better fighter than you. So the benefits of overconfidence are such and so widespread that actually overconfidence is a natural situation in our species. So if you look around to your neighbour there, the person you're looking at is overconfident. And similarly, if you looked at yourself in the mirror, we're all overconfident there. Okay, so the other thing that we wanted to look at there or talk about there was optimism bias there. So this is the third one here. And this is where we believe we're going to get lucky. Now, is there any smokers here? Hands up. There's a few, yep. So you see this with smokers and cancer. Pretty well every smoker knows that long-term exposure to tobacco smoke raises your risk to cancer and other smoking-related diseases very significantly. I hope that's not surprise to anyone here, right? Every smoker knows that. But also, every smoker they know of somebody that smoked for absolutely years, never had a problem, and they die at the age of 87, drop dead of a heart attack from chasing their nurse or something like that. And they believe that although they know most people that are long-term smoking are going to succumb from cancer, they're going to be a lucky few that don't. And they believe they're going to be one of those lucky ones. Now, when we're doing our project, we know that most projects get hit by adverse events. We know that, okay? And it's a reality. But we also know that there are a few projects that actually, they don't get hit. And so when we're doing that estimation, we secretly believe that our project is going to be one of those lucky ones and not get hit by adverse events. So, the question is going to be, what are the evolutionary benefits of optimism bias? Because we can see that perhaps it has some disadvantages and it may cause us to fail to prepare for something. Well, again, we're back to those competitions or those fights. Okay? It will cause us to overestimate our chances of winning. And this will give us two benefits. First, it will cause us or encourage us to participate in a competition or a fight that we've got a low chance of winning, but if we win it, it's got a huge evolutionary payoff. The second thing is that, remember, before that fight ever started, there was a whole load of bluffing. It helps with that self-deception there. If you believe or you're deluded into believing that you're going to win, it is going to help yourself convince the other rival that actually you're going to be winning there. So this is why we have these benefits, or what used to be benefits. So we have these biases here, anchoring overconfidence, optimism bias, and they're causing us to underestimate. And there's some other biases as well. All of them are driving us to underestimate our projects. Now, once our project is underestimated and it's going ahead, it's going to go overdue. And this is when you see projects take crazy risks, or if you're an economist, you would say behave irrationally. Right? If you look at the projects that are taking crazy risks, overwhelmingly they are overdue projects. A project that's on a schedule doesn't do that. So again, you've got to ask this question, why would a project take crazy risk, and why would it do it only when it's overdue? Again, you've got to go back to our evolutionary past there. And essentially, This was, you remember there, the hamburger that you saw earlier? It makes no sense to take unnecessary risks in a situation where you're doing well. However, when you are doing badly and there's a risk of starvation, then it makes sense to take risks. And so you get this risk switching. And what happens on an overdue project is that it triggers a switch in our mindset there and our risk appetite from risk adverse into risk seeking. So that's what's happening there, and that's why overdue projects take crazy risks. Okay, so we have all of these problems on the left-hand side, all of them that you can see here. So projects, they fail, they come late, we take crazy risks, we work in silos. All of these we've had for the past 50 or more years. And we've had these problems for 50 or more years because they've been driven, at least in part, by human factors. So projects fail and they're late because of the biases that we've seen there. Projects take crazy risks because they switch their risk appetite, because that was what we did in our ancestral past in response to food shortages. We work in silos because in our ancestral past, strangers and strange groups, typically they were potentially very dangerous to us. So it made sense to be highly suspicious and uncooperative of strange groups there. Okay. We have too much technical debt when we deliver it. Technical debt is not a technical problem. It sounds as if it should be, but it's not. All that technical debt is a result of a trade-off between current and future and benefits and liabilities there. And it's that classic vice versus virtue dilemma that we get into. And what happens with technical debt is that it's the way that we make decisions. We make decisions, and we all know this, we don't make decisions with our head, we make it with our gut, or we make it with our heart, yeah? The difficulty, and so if you put that in psychology speak, actually we use a heuristic. It's called the affect heuristic. And what that means is that when we use the affect heuristic, the things that are relevant to technical debt there and that decision, they do not touch the affect heuristic. So they don't weigh very heavily. Whereas the things that we benefit from there, perhaps the additional features or getting stuff delivered early, they really touch the heuristic. So when we make that decision, we're very unbalanced in what we decide there. We add in processes, quality doesn't improve, and this is because of an effect known as risk compensation or the Peltzman effect. Our regression packs, they're full of junk tests because of an effect known as the endowment effect. We end up with go-live disasters because we continue to follow a plan, even when that plan is clearly unfolding and breaking apart in front of us. We continue to follow it there. And it's plan continuation bias. And we continue to have these zombie projects that should have died and should have been killed off, but they continue along because we've invested so much in them that we follow the sunk cost effect. Now, all of these problems on the left-hand side, I have to stand a little close over here. All of these problems on the left-hand side, they've always existed for the past 50 or more years. And they've existed because they continue to be, we have all of these biases on the right-hand side, and we're not addressing them yet. Now, you may say, how can we possibly even address them? Because so many of them are subconscious. So we're not even aware that we're doing these things. Well, the answer here is other industries are already addressing similar problems. Now, how many people here flew into the conference? Yes, quite a few. Okay, most of you, I am presuming, are extremely grateful that passenger aviation there is an extremely safe form of transport. Yeah, we're all happy about that. It is a safe form of transport not because pilots never make mistakes. It is a safe form of transportation because the airline industry realizes in order to survive, it needs to make it safe and perceived as safe. So it needs to make sure that the mistakes that pilots make do not end up as disasters. So this industry is already doing many of these things. And similarly in surgery, surgery is now using things around human factors to improve patient safety. And perhaps the book you're most likely to have heard of or read here is Nudge. How many of you heard of Nudge? A few? Yeah. So it's a worthwhile book to read. So it was written by Richard Thaler, a Nobel Prize winner, and Cass Sunstein, and it talks about how they used ideas around these human factors and cognitive biases to improve ways that policies were implemented by governments there. So it is indeed possible for us to do this. The question is, how can we fix it? There's perhaps two routes to this. So one is through training, and that's a bit that I'm involved in at various stages. And another there is that nudges there, where perhaps you change that decision environment. So an example of the training is, I'll show you something that I was working on about a year ago here. So it involved some questionnaires. So I took some questionnaires. These questionnaires, as you can see, originally it was used in aviation industry as an attempt to uncover potentially hazardous attitudes amongst student and professional pilots there. And so what they do is they present them with a situation, a scenario there like this, and then they ask them, how could you have got into that situation? Okay? And then they present them with a series of potential answers. And so here are the answers here. And so the pilots, they had to rank in order the most likely to the least likely. Now, of course, nobody actually would easily or readily admit that actually they would get themselves into a silly situation like this. So none of the answers up there are good answers. You know, I was transporting some kidneys for a sick child. That answer is not up there. So instead, you have to select between these. By doing this and getting people to select which is the most likely, what you're able to do is you're able to uncover within people their potential hazardous attitudes. So, for example, if somebody selected this as the most likely one here, it would indicate that they're perhaps vulnerable to a macho attitude. And similarly, for these other ones here, it would suggest some other types of attitudes there, anti-authority, feelings of invulnerability, and so on there. So you can tease out of people through these forced ranking questionnaires their vulnerability to different types of attitudes there. And so if you ask this question plus some other questions, what you can do is you can paint a picture of a person's, an individual's relative vulnerability to it. So, for example, for this person, perhaps the thing that they need to be most aware of is feelings of a macho attitude that may get them into trouble. Or, for this person, it's perhaps feelings of invulnerability. Nothing's going to go wrong for them. And so you can see that perhaps we can look at applying this ourselves to perhaps these biases there, and perhaps putting together some questions around this and working out our relative vulnerabilities to different types of biases there. So for this person here, it would be perhaps they're most vulnerable to, they've got an optimistic viewpoint on life there. Okay. Another thing that we can use, and it's used quite extensively in other industries, is checklists. Okay. Some of you may already be using them, and for example, this is probably the best known book on it, Atul Gawande, where he describes how he used checklists to improve patient survival following surgical procedures here. Essentially, he took a lot of these ideas from the aviation industry, which is a good source of these kind of ideas there. But as well as this, we can set up checklists around revealing biases. So perhaps, we can be asking questions that may reveal around anchoring, or overconfidence, or optimism bias there. Another thing that you can do is you can bring in an external observer. The important word there is observer. So they need to be independent because it's so much easier to spot somebody else's mistakes rather than your own, and it's a whole lot more fun as well, let's be honest about it. You will need them to be trained in these biases so they can spot what is happening there with the biases. And in fact, this was recently proposed in a book, I think it was out last year there, by another Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman there. He's probably more famous for his book, Thinking, Fast and Slow there. So, we have all these problems on the left-hand side there, and we've had them for 50 or even more years. Okay? And we've had them because, at least in part, they've been driven by these human factors. And we're not addressing these human factors at the moment. And so we will always have these problems. We'll always have these problems on the left until we start addressing these human factors on the right. Now, it's not going to be a quick fix, which is a real pity because our industry absolutely loves quick fixes, doesn't it? We love them. Every time a quick fix comes along, we're all onto it, okay? Unfortunately, this is not going to be a quick fix because we need to slow down quite a bit. And we need to understand these biases. We need to understand why they occur, how they are going to influence the project behaviour, and also we then need to develop mitigation mechanisms. But we can do this. And some of us are starting to do this now already. And so if you're interested, you can be doing this as well. So think about this. If we do address this, perhaps in 10 years, all of my predictions will be entirely wrong. And whoever bet their money on this won't be a billionaire. So imagine a world in 10 years' time where our projects do run on time and they run to budget because we understand the biases that are driving us to underestimate and we avoid them. Or our projects don't take crazy risks because we never put the people in the project into a situation where their risk appetite switches into risk-seeking behaviour. Or teams cooperate because we understand why they don't cooperate and we put things in to avoid those situations. And all these other things here. And all of these other industries, they are starting to do this. And I think that it's about time that actually we started doing this ourselves here. And I think that the pieces are in place for us to now start doing this. So, thank you very much. Do we have any questions? Okay, do we have someone with a microphone? Or I've caught you a little early, haven't I? I'm sorry, it should have taken about another 5 minutes, but I will be honest with you, I was a little nervous because I don't know if you noticed, but actually the visual part of the AV system wasn't working. So I think that perhaps the organisers thought that maybe I didn't have enough adrenaline running around inside me when I stood in front of 100 people. So they sort of arranged a little bit of extra excitement for me just before the session started. As a result of that, when I get nervous, like yourselves probably there, fortunately for you, I don't do the fight or flight thing, so I didn't fight anyone or didn't run away, but actually I do go a bit faster through the presentation. Great, thanks. So, my first question. Great, from the back.
So, first of all, thank you for this presentation. And my question is, are there any specific studies or books or research about how biases are actually affecting the testing process, not the overall software development process?
There's certainly, there's certainly, well, actually, perhaps the question may be, are there actually scientific studies on this rather than just kind of general things? And actually, yes, the answer is yes, there are. So there's a couple of, there's a university group up in, anyone here from Finland? No, okay, then it doesn't matter how I pronounce this then. Oulu? Okay, Oulu University in Finland. I'm sorry if that was the wrong pronunciation. There's quite a strong research group there where they have done a meta-study of all the biases there. There are quite a few around. There's certainly some around software development, and there are some around testing as well. I can't recall them there, but yes, there are studies on this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And another one, you said that there isn't any quick fix on how to overcome these biases. Is there a workaround?
Yeah.
Like workarounds.
Yes, there will be some workarounds, yeah. I think the first, so this would be, right, so the workarounds bit, this would actually involve some others doing some work in the way that nudges are done. So the way that the nudges people work is that they say, yeah, we recognize that there are biases and there are humans are fallible. They say, we're not sure that we can change people because these biases are subconscious. what we will do is we will change the environment there so that these biases work towards a good decision rather than a bad decision. So example here would be, for example, with the estimation there, anchoring. Okay, if you know that the anchoring effect is going to be driven by the business or somebody who wants the software, designing the software for as soon as possible, as low as possible, suggesting that early value, you can put in another anchor there, and perhaps before anybody makes an anchor, you could perhaps ask this question: if everything went terrible on this project and everything went really bad, what is the latest that it could possibly be? Actually be delivered, and what's the maximum that it could possibly cost? And then, particularly if you ran that as an exercise, and we do love our sort of workshop exercises there with the post-it notes, so we could put up all the problems that could come, and then we could work that out. We could be very inventive about it. We could come up with some very high numbers, so that actually when we go into the estimate, we are anchoring, we're coming down rather than going up. So yes, there are perhaps some quick fixes that we can think about, yeah. Thanks.
Worry not, I am here with the mic.
Hello, thank you for the presentation, and I would like to know if you have a take on machine learning, because more and more decision-making processes are outsourced to algorithms, if that can potentially remove those biases.
I think a lot has already been said, and it will be a cliche for me to say about biases in machine learning around, for example, hiring decisions there. And everybody has probably heard or read of an article about that, where minority groups have been discriminated by biases there. So, yeah, essentially, I think that a difficulty with machine learning is that it's dependent upon that data. If that data has become it's got our biases baked into it, then the machine learning will develop those biases there. So in some ways, it's sort of a picture of desperation, but it's also a picture of hope as well, because actually if we're aware of those biases, then we can perhaps do something to influence the data so that although that data may be biased, then perhaps we can change the way that it's interpreted so that those biases are either removed or perhaps compensated for.
All right, thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
So usually companies are in competition for clients, and this competition is like who is delivering for lower cost with highest quality and in the lowest amount of time. And how do you mix this with the coming down from up instead of going up from down?
Yeah, you've seen a fundamental flaw in the idea here, yeah. And this is another aspect of it, and I haven't got time to talk about that, but essentially, part of this is that even if we solve these problems of the biases, we may still have them, because actually the system that we are in may prevent us from actually accepting an accurate bias. You can imagine if there was two companies there, one of which had been done an inaccurate estimate, and so it was full of all of these biases there. So they significantly underestimated the project, and they bid it $1 million. Another one had accurately estimated, and they'd realised there, and it was at $5 million. They're not going to get that bid. Yeah. And that's true, even if the people that are doing the bid know that it's really going to cost them $5 million, and if they accept the $1 million bid, it's going to cause them big problems. They will still go and accept that $1 million bid. So yeah, this is a further problem, particularly around the certain aspects of these, which actually we're going to find difficulty in escaping without using something called systems thinking. So how many people here have heard of systems thinking? Yep, great. So there's a few of us. Right, so systems thinking, we think about we think about a whole system there, and we optimize the whole system. So if you've built your own PC, for example, you would have used systems thinking there. So if you're putting a 32-bit operating system in to the computing you're building, you wouldn't put more than 4 gigabytes of RAM because you can't address more than 4 gigabytes of addresses there. That's systems thinking, but that's applying systems thinking to the systems we're building, which is where we're doing it. What we can also do is we can apply systems thinking to ourselves and our humans there. And if we do that, then we can understand a whole series of problems there in new ways. So one of the things that you can do is you can actually, if you do that, you can understand the problem of underestimation not as a problem of these biases, which it is, but actually you can also look at it as a problem of addiction, where our system, we have become addicted to poor estimations there. In a similar way, you can also look at technical debt not as a balance between a trade-off there where we use our effect heuristic, but you can look at it as a problem of addiction where our organizations have become addicted to getting quick fixes and piling up more and more technical debt. This is a different way of looking at it. If you want a good book to read about this subject of systems thinking from a human's point of view, I would say Donella Meadows, Thinking in Systems. Really great book. Also, look her up. There's a couple of YouTube videos of her on the internet. They're very old. She died about 20 years ago. And it will also lead you to other YouTube videos around this.
Cool. We're 1 minute away. Any last questions?
No need to be shy. Yeah? I was the one standing at the front without a screen running.
We're all friends here.
No?
There we go.
Ah, great,
One
great.
last question.
Hi, so you've presented an image that we're pretty much dependent on how we were thinking during while we were still living in caves. And so our thoughts are dictated by our subconscious, obviously.
Yeah.
Right, so we did have, let's say, a grim estimation, 2032, we're still going to do it. Do we also have a happy estimation by when might we be able to, let's say, maybe not completely eliminate the issue, but rather mend it?
I would say mending these issues is perhaps, looking at it in terms of a time thing, is probably not useful. It might be more useful to think of what needs to be in place for this to have happened. So if we look at things in that way, we could see perhaps where these ideas about human factors, if we look at other industries, we could see where they've been picked up fairly quickly. And so if I'm thinking there, it's perhaps the advertising, media, and marketing there, they've picked these things up fairly quickly because they can get some quick and direct gains there. Healthcare has been a bit more resistant to it for various reasons. Aviation industry has been extremely quick about this. And the reason is that they're always very quick about things about safety. Not necessarily because they really, really care about every single one of us. It's because they realize that as an industry, they will not exist if we are frightened to get on planes there. So it's perhaps looking at what it is. Now, I think for ourselves, a big difficulty that we've got is that we've got a fairly cozy industry going now, and we may complain about all of these problems, but they've been around for 50 years. So obviously we're living with these problems, and I think that if you looked at this, and I should be careful here because I work for consultancy, but you could see that the industry that we've got here with perhaps large clients, large consultancies, it may not necessarily sort of encourage new ideas that are going to damage existing interests in there. So that's why I think that it may well be that these ideas, they actually come from outside of the industry, and we have a new entrant coming in there.
So as long as there's no existential crisis, so to speak, we're still going to go on this path?
We will go on a path towards a better understanding of human factors and changing it, but it could be a faster path than we're likely to be on. But we're on that path.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You have one more question. Oh, okay.
I'm probably a little more optimistic than you, Andrew, in seeing organizations solving this issue and solving these biases, because we see some losses in big vendors. At the moment, we see some scandals. We have seen some scandals in huge IT projects. They have caught a lot of attention from the media, and I think there is a consensus that this cannot go on, at least in big projects.
Great. Yep. Yeah, that's an optimistic viewpoint. Yeah, and I would go with that. Yeah. Thank you, Anders.
The
Thank
platform is burning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause to Andrew.